She danced through life on a throne of privilege, drunk on power and champagne, until one fateful night, her speeding car shattered a boy's future. Now stripped of her crown, haunted by his broken body, and despised by a world out for blood, she must claw her way to redemption through the one soul she nearly destroyed. Can a fallen queen rise from the ashes of her own wreckage, or will her past bury her alive? Hit subscribe to find out. Her next move could change everything. Emily Ashford, 24, the daughter of a wealthy businessman, stepped into the lavish penthouse with an air of confidence that radiated as if the entire world had been built to serve her. The diamond-encrusted dress she wore clung to her body, accentuating every curve. With each step, she left behind a trail of sparkling light reflecting beneath the crystal chandeliers hanging above. The atmosphere of the party was thick with the scent of luxurious perfumes, strong liquor, and the soft giggles of those who would never have to worry about tomorrow. Emily raised her fifth glass of champagne, her lips curving into a satisfied smile as she leaned back in the Italian leather armchair, surrounded by her high society friends, each dressed in extravagant outfits. But none could shine brighter than she. "Don't drive tonight, Claire." Her closest friend leaned in, her voice a mix of concern and caution. Claire had always been the most sober of the group, the one standing outside the whirlwind of vanity in which Emily was immersed. But tonight, Emily wasn't in the mood for those boring reminders. She let out a loud laugh, her voice ringing through the crowd. "I'm the queen. No one can touch me," she declared, raising an eyebrow proudly, her eyes glittering with an arrogance that was hard to conceal. Claire sighed, but said nothing more. They had been friends long enough to know that no one could change Emily once she made up her mind. The party raged on. Glasses were constantly refilled, and the thumping beats of electronic music shook the space. Emily turned, the lights catching her flawless face, sharp yet distant in its beauty. The people surrounding her cheered and complimented, but it all felt like a repetitive performance Emily had long since memorized. A man stepped forward, gently touching her arm, his eyes gleaming with admiration mixed with greed. Emily just smiled, pulling her hand back, her gaze cutting through him like a knife, making him awkwardly retreat. She loved this feeling, the power, the control, the ability to make others feel small in her presence. But deep down, there was an emptiness she'd never dare acknowledge. She glanced at Claire, who was still watching her intently, her eyes holding something that made Emily feel uneasy. It wasn't admiration, it wasn't envy. It was disappointment, something Emily wasn't used to facing. She stood up abruptly, signaling the bartender for another drink, trying to push the strange feeling that was creeping into her mind away. Just then, her phone vibrated, a message from her father. He wanted her to come home immediately. Emily pouted, too indifferent to reply. Tonight was hers, and no one could give her orders. Outside the glass window, the city sprawled out like a carpet of twinkling lights below. Millions of people lived lives that were completely different from Emily's world, one without extravagant parties, expensive sports cars, or custom-made dresses from Paris. But none of that mattered to her. She tilted her head back and drank the last of her champagne, feeling the cold liquid slide down her throat before standing up. "Let's go," she smiled at Claire, holding the car keys in her hand. Claire grabbed her arm, her gaze pleading, but Emily just smirked and gently pushed her away. "I'm not drunk," she said, but even she knew it was a lie. The click of her high heels echoed on the marble floor as she exited the penthouse, her long, curly hair flowing with each movement of her body. Eyes followed her, but no one had the courage to stop her. Emily was the queen of this little universe, a kingdom built on diamonds and lies. And tonight, she still believed she was untouchable. After the party, Emily slammed the accelerator of her white Porsche as she flew through the quiet streets of the city. The tires screeched in protest, biting into the asphalt as she pushed the pedal harder, her grip on the wheel tightening. The city around her blurred, streaks of light flashing past, mixing with the haze of alcohol clouding her vision. The street lights glowed like faint stars in the distance, their warmth uninviting as she sped through the night. The cool wind cut through the open window, but it only added fuel to the fire coursing through her veins, a fire she couldn't extinguish no matter how hard she tried. One hand on the wheel, the other lost in the air, swaying to the throbbing electric beat of the music pounding from her speakers. She laughed, loud and wild, the sound echoing in the car as she yelled into the night, "I'm the queen. Nothing can stop me." Her foot pressed down harder. The speedometer shot past 100 miles per hour, her mind completely consumed by the rush, the adrenaline, and the power she felt. The buildings, the trees lining the streets, the traffic lights, all of it melted into nothing, shadows flitting past like ghosts. Emily's eyes were heavy, glazed with drunkenness and euphoria, but her smile never wavered. She didn't care about the world outside, not when she was this free, this invincible. But then, as if out of nowhere, a shadow darted across her path, a sudden movement in the corner of her eye. A scream pierced the night. Time seemed to stretch in that split second, but everything happened so fast. The headlights illuminated the fragile form of Liam, 14 years old, in his green basketball jersey soaked in sweat from practice. He was riding his bike home, his head down, oblivious to the nightmare barreling toward him. Emily's blood ran cold as her hands reflexively yanked at the wheel. She slammed her foot onto the brake, but it was already too late. The impact was deafening. The Porsche flew through the air as it collided with Liam. The sound of metal against flesh and bone was a sickening crash, a thud that could only be described as hell itself. The tires screeched as the car skidded across the pavement, the front end crumpling, leaving a black streak of rubber on the road. Liam was thrown up into the air like a rag doll, twisting and turning as his body danced in the headlights. The world seemed to slow down in that one moment, his limbs jerking at impossible angles before he crashed down, the brutal thud of his body hitting the road reverberating through the street. The world fell silent. The car came to a halt, its front bumper twisted and broken, hanging by a thread. For a brief moment, there was nothing, no sound, no music, no laughter, only the cold, suffocating silence that swallowed the night. Emily's breath came in shallow gasps, her hands clutching the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. She blinked, the fog of alcohol in her mind thickening, her heart racing. She couldn't comprehend what had just happened. When she looked out the windshield, her blood turned to ice. Liam lay sprawled on the road, his body twisted in an unnatural position. A pool of blood formed around his head, spreading out like a grotesque painting on the black asphalt. His eyes were wide open, lifeless, staring blankly into the void. His mouth was slightly open, as though he had tried to scream, but the last breath had already been stolen from him. His leg was bent at an impossible angle, his Nike sneakers stained crimson with blood, and the bike, still spinning slowly as though in a state of disbelief, sat motionless next to him. The world around her spun, and Emily felt a coldness seep into her bones. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. "No, no, no, no," she whispered, her voice cracking with disbelief. Her heart pounded in her ears, but she couldn't tear her eyes away from the scene before her. Her hands shook uncontrollably as she reached for the door handle. She stepped out of the car, her expensive high heels sinking into the blood-soaked pavement without her even realizing it, leaving behind crimson footprints in the night. A wave of nausea hit her like a freight train. She stumbled, her body pulling her down as though gravity itself was working against her. She pressed her mouth shut, her eyes wide, her chest tight, but nothing could stop the wave of bile rising in her throat. The smell of blood, sharp and metallic, mixed with the sour sting of alcohol in her system, and it was too much. She was going to be sick. She dropped to her knees, her body trembling violently as she tried to hold herself together. Please, no. This can't be real. But it was real. Everything around her was real. The blood, the twisted body, the pain that filled her chest, choking her with its weight, the horror of what she had just done. She could still hear Liam's eyes staring at her, still feel the weight of his death pressing down on her like 1,000 pounds. A distant sound broke through the fog, siren wails growing louder, closer. The panic ignited inside her like a wildfire, burning away the remnants of control. Her mind screamed at her to run, to get out of there, but her body refused to move. Her legs buckled beneath her, the world spinning, her head dizzy. Her body felt detached, like it was no longer hers. In the distance, a door slammed open, and a voice screamed, desperate and full of terror. "Oh God, did anyone call 911? The kid, Somebody call an ambulance. Please, somebody help. The words pierced her, dragging her back into the nightmare that was her reality. She blinked, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps, her heart beating so loudly she thought it might explode. For the first time in her life, Emily Ashford felt small, helpless. Nothing of the grand illusion she had built for herself mattered anymore. Nothing of the glamour, the power, the wealth mattered anymore. All of it crumbled, leaving her exposed and naked in the cold truth. She had killed him, and there was no escaping it. No amount of money, no amount of power, no amount of control could change what had just happened. She had taken a life. The flashing red lights of the police cars drenched the quiet street, turning it into a scene from a nightmare. What was once a peaceful neighborhood now felt like the aftermath of a brutal crime. Emily remained kneeling next to the twisted wreck of her Porsche, her body frozen in place, her eyes wide and hollow. The siren screamed in her ears, deafening and relentless, cutting through her like a blade, shattering every fragment of the reality she had once known. The weight of everything that had happened pressed down on her, suffocating her with its unforgiving grip. Her hands trembled violently as they dug into the cold asphalt beneath her, her breath shallow, ragged, as if the air itself had turned to lead. The sound of rapid footsteps echoed from behind her, approaching with urgency. A voice, harsh and commanding, broke through the fog of her panic. Hands behind your head. Stand up now. The officer's voice was sharp and unwavering, cutting through the confusion in her mind. Emily's head snapped toward the sound, her blood running cold as a tall, imposing officer came into view. His face was hard, stern, his eyes cold and assessing beneath the flashing lights. He moved toward her with purpose, his gaze never leaving hers. Emily's body trembled uncontrollably as she shook her head, her voice cracking with desperation. I didn't mean to. I didn't see him. I swear. I swear. Her words spilled out in a panicked rush, twisted in fear, almost impossible to understand. Her chest heaved with shallow breaths, her whole being consumed by the growing sense of dread. She felt herself being pulled roughly to her feet by another officer. She stumbled, unsteady, but her mind was too far gone, too consumed by the terror that gripped her to make sense of anything. Don't resist, the officer's voice again, cold and distant. The authority in his tone made her stomach twist. His words were devoid of any sympathy, any understanding. There was no room for explanation, no space for remorse, just commands, just power. And then, the sound that pierced her soul, the unmistakable click of handcuffs locking around her wrists. The cold steel snapped shut, final and unyielding. And with it, the last remnants of her control shattered into a million pieces. The sound of the cuffs seemed to echo in her mind, reverberating through her, slicing away every illusion she had about herself. The girl who had once been untouchable, who had believed that her money and status had granted her immunity, now found herself bound, trapped, and powerless. The realization hit her with brutal force. This wasn't just about a mistake, about an accident. This was real. She had taken a life. She had killed him. A primal fear surged through her, a kind of terror that she had never experienced before. It wasn't the fear of being caught, of facing the consequences. It was the raw, unrelenting fear of being exposed for the fraud she had become. Her mind, once sharp and quick to justify, now floundered in the sea of her own guilt. She was no longer the queen she had once imagined herself to be. She was just a girl with no excuses left. As the officers began to pull her away from the scene, she heard it, a voice, broken and filled with despair, cutting through the night air like a knife. A woman, her face streaked with tears, her whole body shaking in anguish, was kneeling in the street. Her hands clutched a handbag as if it were her only lifeline. Liam, my baby. Please, save my baby. The woman's voice cracked, filled with an unbearable agony as the ambulance stretcher rolled past, carrying Liam, what was left of him, into the vehicle. The blood from his body still stained the road, spreading outward in dark crimson rivers, marking the spot where he had fallen. The sight of it, the vivid red against the black asphalt, burned into Emily's eyes, a permanent reminder of the life she had stolen. The crowd around them grew larger, drawn by the chaos, by the sirens, by the need to witness the tragedy. Faces appeared from the shadows of nearby houses, people spilling into the street, whispering, pointing, their eyes filled with anger and pain. It was like a storm was descending upon her, and she was powerless to stop it. A middle-aged man stepped forward, his fist clenched tightly, his eyes bloodshot with rage. He was trembling, but not with fear, with fury. Another woman stood beside him, speaking in hushed tones to her husband, but her eyes were locked on Emily with such contempt, such venom, that it felt like a physical blow. "Who is she?" someone asked, their voice sharp and filled with disgust. "Emily Ashford, daughter of the billionaire Ashford. You know, one of those rich brats who think they're above everything. A spoiled little brat who thinks she can get away with anything. Well, not this time." Emily's heart hammered in her chest as she felt their eyes on her, each one a sharp accusation. She wanted to scream, to explain that it was an accident, that she didn't mean it, that she never saw him coming. But the words wouldn't come. The weight of the gazes that now pressed upon her was too much. She could feel the fury, the hatred, the judgment pouring out of every person around her. They didn't see her as a person who had made a mistake. No, to them, she was already a murderer, a privileged girl born into wealth who had never once been made to face the consequences of her actions. She was shut roughly into the back of a police car. The door slammed shut behind her with a deafening bang, sealing her fate. The flashing lights outside no longer seemed bright, no longer felt powerful. The noise, the chaos, was muffled now, and all that remained was the suffocating silence of the car, a silence so thick and heavy that it pressed in on her from all sides. Her body was stiff, her mind spinning in a whirlpool of guilt and fear. But it was the image of Liam's lifeless eyes staring up at her from the street that haunted her most, the image of the boy she had killed, forever burned into her mind. She had once believed she was untouchable. She had once believed that no one could ever hurt her, that she could do whatever she wanted without facing any real consequences. But now, as she sat in the back of that police car, she realized how wrong she had been. The throne she had once sat upon had been shattered, torn apart by the harsh reality that she could no longer escape. The queen was gone. The illusion was gone. And all that was left was Emily Ashford, alone, with nothing to hold on to but the crushing weight of her own guilt. Inside the vast courtroom, the air felt dense, as though someone had siphoned all the oxygen from the room. The cold wooden benches sat in neat rows, and the faint light streaming through the high windows cast a pale, indifferent glow onto the marble floor. Emily sat at the defendant's table, her back straight, her hair pulled back neatly, every strand in place, perfectly arranged. Her beige dress hugged her form, projecting an image of calm elegance, an image any good lawyer would advise their client to present in court. But no matter how much she tried to appear composed, her eyes still gleamed with arrogance, as if this entire drama was nothing more than a performance she had no choice but to participate in. She leaned in toward her lawyer, Greg Thompson, a middle-aged man whose face always seemed etched with exhaustion. Her voice dropped to a whisper, steady but alarming. "Dad will take care of this, right?" Greg didn't answer immediately. He simply tightened his grip on the stack of documents in his hand and sighed, leaning closer to her. His voice low but serious, he said, "This time, you have to handle it yourself." Emily blinked, a flash of confusion crossing her eyes before it was replaced by a thin, skeptical smile. She tilted her head as if checking if she'd misheard. "You're joking, right? My father has never left me alone." Greg met her gaze, his eyes filled with a reluctant sympathy. "This time, it's different, Emily. He's not intervening." For the first time since stepping into the courtroom, Emily felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She had always believed that no matter what happened, her father would swoop in at the last moment, throwing money and influence to turn any mess into dust. But this time, he hadn't come. He hadn't called her. He hadn't sent in a top lawyer from his firm. And most importantly, he hadn't promised her anything to help her escape this mess. She turned her head sharply, scanning the faces in the crowd, searching for a familiar one. But there was no one. The seats behind her were filled with strangers, police officers, reporters, local citizens, all gathered to witness justice being served. Not a single person was here for her. No one had come to save her. "The trial will now begin." The deep voice of Judge Daniel Carter rang out, strong and decisive. pulling her back into reality. Emily swallowed hard and turned her gaze toward the judge, sitting high above in his seat of authority. He was a middle-aged man with dark skin, salt and pepper hair, and eyes that were as sharp as a razor. Unlike the judges Emily had seen on television, who typically carried an air of objectivity or coldness, his gaze held a deep, piercing understanding. Not sympathy, but the kind of look that only someone who had seen too much privilege, too many people like her walk into courtrooms thinking they could leave without consequences, could possess. When he looked at her, Emily felt as though he was seeing through her, through the mask of pride she so carefully maintained. It felt like he was looking directly into the heart of her, a place she had long kept hidden. She swallowed hard, but the sensation didn't fade. "Defendant, please rise." Emily stood, placing her hands in front of her, forcing herself to maintain a composed exterior. But deep inside, there was an unease creeping through her, a feeling she had never experienced before. For the first time in her life, she didn't know what would happen next. And that uncertainty, that loss of control, terrified her. The air in the courtroom grew unbearably thick, as though the very atmosphere had been sucked out, leaving an oppressive void that seemed to choke the room. Every eye in the space was fixed on the woman standing from the witness stand, Anna Ellis, the mother of Liam. She moved slowly, almost as if each step was burdened with the weight of an unimaginable sorrow. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen and red, a deep, unspoken grief etched in the lines of her expression. Each movement she made was deliberate, but it felt as though she was carrying a weight far heavier than the physical one. As she placed her hand on the wooden podium, the room was still, so still that even the faintest sound, the smallest sob, echoed through the space. Judge Daniel Carter nodded slightly, his silent acknowledgement granting her permission to speak. Anna inhaled deeply, fighting to control the tremble in her voice. But the words came out broken, each one tinged with unbearable pain. "My son, Liam, was a good boy," Anna began, her voice steady but trembling. "He wasn't a troublemaker. He didn't party, didn't get into trouble. That night, he was just coming home from basketball practice. He was riding his bike on the sidewalk, just like I told him to do every day. He was doing everything right. But that girl..." She paused for a moment, her eyes locking onto Emily's, her gaze burning with an intensity that seemed to reach deep into her soul, searching for understanding, for answers. "That girl destroyed everything." Emily lowered her head, not in apology, but to avoid the piercing gaze of a mother whose world had been torn apart. She didn't want to look into those eyes filled with unspeakable anguish, eyes that blamed her for a life lost. "Liam might never walk again," Anna continued, her voice cracking as she pushed through the words. "Every day, I have to watch my son lying motionless in that hospital bed, his tears falling as the doctors tell me that even if he recovers, he may never play basketball again." She choked back a sob, her hands gripping the podium so tightly that her knuckles turned bone white. "Who does she think she is, taking away my son's future? Who does she think she is, thinking that just because she's rich, she can drive drunk, ruin a child's life, and think that saying sorry will make it all okay?" Emily's fists clenched at her sides, her nails digging into her palms, but she forced herself to appear indifferent. She had heard this before, the accusations, the blame. Since her arrest, since the media had made her the focus of their outrage, Emily had heard hundreds, even thousands, of people calling her out for her actions. But none of those words had reached her. Why? Because she had always believed that, just like before, things would pass. The wealth, the influence, her father's promises would always ensure that nothing truly stuck. But then the large screen on the right side of the courtroom flickered to life. A video began to play, footage from the traffic cameras that had recorded the night of the accident. The silence that had already filled the room seemed to deepen, turning into something almost suffocating. The first image was that of a quiet street at midnight, the yellow street lights casting their dim glow across the empty sidewalks. Then, from the distance, a white sports car appeared, speeding toward the camera like a missile. It didn't slow down. There were no signs of braking. It was pure speed and reckless abandon. And then, in the blink of an eye, a figure appeared. Liam, a young boy, thin and unassuming, riding his bike home, unaware of the disaster rushing toward him. Emily held her breath, her heart clenching as the horror unfolded before her eyes once more. The Porsche hurtled forward like a predator, closing in on its prey. A scream echoed from the video, but Liam didn't even have time to react. He didn't have time to turn. The car struck him with the force of a freight train. His body was lifted into the air, thrown like a rag doll, spinning and twisting in midair. The sound of metal crashing into flesh and bone was deafening, followed by the spine-chilling screech of tires as the car tried, too late, to stop. And then, with a sickening thud, Liam's body hit the pavement. The video froze at that moment, but the consequences of that moment would live on forever. Someone in the courtroom gasped. A woman buried her face in her hands, her sobs breaking the heavy silence. A man shook his head, his face contorted in disbelief and fury. But none of their reactions mattered, because in that moment, the only person Emily could see, the only person who seemed to matter, was Anna. The woman said nothing. She simply stared at the screen, her gaze fixed on the moment when her son's life was taken away from him. And when Anna turned to face Emily, her eyes were no longer filled with rage. There was no anger left. There was only emptiness, a hollowness that was far more terrifying than any anger could have been. Emily felt her heart drop into her stomach, her breath caught in her throat, her hands clenched so tightly against her thigh that her nails nearly pierced her skin. Something deep inside her stirred, a weight she had never felt before, a heaviness that pulled her down with a force she couldn't explain. This wasn't just a trial. It wasn't just a courtroom drama. This was a life, Liam's life, that had been destroyed. And she was the one who had done it. As Anna's empty gaze remained locked on her, Emily finally understood. She had always seen herself as untouchable, as someone above the consequences. But now, as she sat there, staring at the woman who had lost everything because of her, she felt the full weight of her actions. This wasn't something she could buy her way out of. This wasn't something that would just go away when the media moved on. This was a life that had been shattered, and she was the one who had shattered it. The truth of that burned through her like fire, more searing than anything she had ever known. The air in the courtroom thickened as Judge Daniel Carter lifted the file in front of him and locked eyes with Emily. Silence enveloped the room, heavy and palpable, as every gaze turned toward him, awaiting the verdict that could change the course of the young woman's life. Standing at the defendant's table, Emily forced herself to maintain a steady breath, but inside, a storm of panic was swirling. She couldn't believe it had come this far, that it had escalated to this point. "Miss Ashford," Judge Carter's voice rang out, each word hanging in the air like an irreversible sentence. "You have not only destroyed a life, but you have displayed an utter disregard for everyone around you. From the moment you entered this courtroom, your attitude has shown no remorse. You have not acknowledged your mistakes. You have not shown any regret. And you have failed to comprehend the consequences of your reckless actions." Emily felt her heart race as her pulse quickened. Cold sweat beaded along her back, but she kept her gaze fixed, the usual defiant look still in her eyes. She bit her lip, trying to stay balanced under the weight of the accusations, but for the first time in her life, something inside her quivered with genuine fear. Judge Carter continued, his sharp eyes never leaving her. "I believe that a simple fine will have no impact on you. A prison sentence may only make you play the victim of the system. Therefore, I am imposing a sentence you cannot escape, a chance for you to confront the consequences of your actions." He paused briefly, and then the words came with finality. "I sentence you to 500 hours of community service at Hope Haven, a rehabilitation center for victims of traffic accidents. There, you will witness firsthand the consequences of reckless driving." The room was deathly quiet for a moment, and then whispers spread like wildfire. Reporters at the back of the room scrambled to take notes, and flashes from cameras lit up the room. But all of that faded in the wake of Emily's reaction. Her eyes widened in disbelief, and a bitter laugh escaped her lips. The sound was harsh, laced with sarcasm and anger. "Community service? Me?" She crossed her arms tightly over her chest, her voice dripping with contempt. "I don't do those kinds of dirty jobs. I'm not the kind of person who scrubs floors or picks up trash. You can't make me do this." All eyes in the courtroom were on her now, the tension palpable. Some whispered to each other. Others just shook their heads in disdain, their faces contorted with disbelief and scorn. Judge Carter remained unmoved. He placed his pen down on the desk, his gaze as cold and unyielding as steel. You will do it, or you will go to jail. The words slammed down like a hammer, breaking through the last of Emily's defiance. She stood frozen, her hands clenched so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. She had expected something else, a lighter sentence, some sort of negotiation, a way to shake off the whole mess and return to her lavish life. But now, every possible escape route had been blocked. The choice is yours, Judge Carter reiterated, his voice calm but filled with undeniable authority. I don't care how you feel about this job, but you will face it. Or you can try your luck in a women's prison. Trust me, they won't care who you are or how rich your father is. The words hit Emily like a physical blow. The thought of being imprisoned was enough to make her stomach twist. Prison. The idea was almost unbearable. She couldn't imagine being confined with real criminals, locked in a tiny room, eating terrible food, losing every privilege she had ever taken for granted. She glanced over at Greg, desperately searching for a way out, but he only shook his head slightly, a look of resignation in his eyes. Emily gritted her teeth, her pride screaming in protest, but deep down, she knew there was no way around it. I'll do it, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, the words leaving her mouth as though she didn't believe them herself. Judge Carter nodded once, his expression unchanged. Good. I hope that by the time those 500 hours are over, you will understand what responsibility truly means. Emily lowered her head, a heavy feeling settling in her chest that she couldn't quite name. For the first time in her life, she felt as though she was truly being forced to confront the consequences of her actions. And the fear that gripped her was deeper than anything she had ever felt before. The room was vast and imposing, an epitome of power and sophistication. The abstract paintings on the walls, the luxurious mahogany desk piled high with important files, and the sleek black leather chairs that reflected the golden light from the crystal chandelier above created an atmosphere where billion-dollar deals were made, where men in expensive suits signed contracts that shaped markets. But today, this room was no longer a symbol of authority. Today, it was merely a battleground for two people, one man with cold, steely eyes and a girl desperately clinging to the remnants of privileges she once had. Emily stood before her father's desk, her eyes flashing with a mixture of anger and panic. She had always believed that no matter what happened, her father would be the one to fix everything, not out of love, but because he had never allowed anything to tarnish the Ashford name. But today, for the first time in her life, she realized she had been wrong. Dad can fix this, she said, her voice trembling with anxiety. He just needs to make a few calls. A word with the governor, a big donation to the county fund, everything will disappear. Richard Ashford didn't immediately look up at her. He continued reading the report on his desk as though she didn't exist. Silence hung in the air, so thick it felt like an enormous weight pressing down on her chest. Emily clenched her fists. Dad, finally, Richard raised his head. His cold blue eyes met hers with a distance she had never seen before. There was no anger, no sympathy, just a calculating, impassive evaluation, as if he were assessing an underperforming employee in his company, a person who had ruined an important deal. No, he said, as simply as if rejecting a business proposal. Emily blinked, unable to comprehend what she had just heard. What? Richard set his pen down, leaned back in his chair, and folded his arms. You've gone too far, Emily. His voice was not loud, but each word cut into her like a knife. This time, I won't intervene. Her heart raced, her palms slick with sweat. You can't do this to me. She took a step forward, placing her hand on the desk, her voice trembling with desperation. You've never made me face anything on my own. Didn't you always teach me that power is for protecting the family? If you won't help me now, then when will you? Richard said nothing. He just looked at her as if waiting for something, a realization, a moment of contrition, or at least a sign that she understood the gravity of what she had done. But Emily was filled with nothing but rage. She slammed her hand on the desk, the sound echoing throughout the room. What? Are you abandoning me? For her. Her voice cracked with frustration and fear. Is it your reputation? Is a name worth more than your daughter? Richard didn't flinch at her outburst. He simply stood up, grabbed his coat, and walked toward the large window that looked out over the city below. This isn't about reputation, Emily, he said, his voice calm but firm. This is an opportunity for you to grow. Emily let out a dry, bitter laugh, her eyes darkening. An opportunity? You think throwing me into community service is an opportunity? You think you're teaching me a lesson? Richard turned around, his gaze sharpening with a new intensity. Yes, I do, he answered without hesitation. And if you don't realize that now, you'll understand soon enough. Emily shook her head, the lump in her throat making it hard to breathe. You don't understand me at all. Richard smirked, a bitter smile crossing his face. No, Emily, you're the one who doesn't understand. Then he turned and walked out of the room, leaving her standing there alone with her anger, her disappointment, and for the first time in her life, a true sense of helplessness. The phone screen lit up repeatedly, each notification popping up like cold bullets piercing through Emily's mind. Every time the phone vibrated, a small piece of her world shattered. She stared at the iPhone lying on the bed, her fingers trembling with hesitation before unlocking it. Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, all the platforms where she had once reigned supreme were now flooded with posts about her. But not the glamorous party pictures or the designer bags she used to flaunt. Now, every post was an accusation. Justice for Liam topped the trending list, accompanied by a picture of a 14-year-old boy lying in a hospital bed, his leg in a cast, his eyes closed in pain. Right next to it was another image, her in the diamond-studded dress, a glass of champagne dangling from her hand, her face twisted in a smug grin. A video from the party had been spliced together, showing the moment she raised her glass high, shouting loudly amidst her friends, "I'm the queen. No one can touch me." The comments flooded in like a torrential downpour, each word cutting into her skin like a knife. She deserves to be in prison. If she were just a regular person, she'd have been locked up by now. A killer disguised as a rich princess. Where is the justice? Liam may never walk again while she still lives in luxury. This is so unfair. She thinks she's a queen? No, she's a monster. Emily threw the phone down on the bed, her heart pounding in her chest. She gasped for air, feeling a wave of dizziness wash over her, as if the room had suddenly contracted, swallowing her whole. She scrambled to open her contacts, searching for a familiar name. Claire, her closest friend, the one who had always been by her side, the one who had always helped her dodge trouble. She hit call. 1 ring. 2 rings. No answer. She tried texting. Claire, are you seeing this? The whole world is turning on me. Where are you? No sign that Claire had read the message. She switched to the group chat with her circle of friends, the ones who had followed her to every party, the ones who had laughed the loudest whenever she did something reckless. The chat that had once been buzzing with excitement was now eerily silent. No replies. Emily opened Instagram, scrolling through the list of people she had once considered her friends, the ones who had liked every post, commented with things like, "Our queen," now remained completely silent. Some had even unfollowed her. Her breath caught in her throat. The entire world had turned its back on her. The people she had once believed would always be there, the ones who had cheered her on through every extravagant celebration, now wanted nothing to do with her. They were all retreating, afraid that if they stayed too close, they too would be swept into the storm of criticism. Emily clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms so hard that it almost drew blood. Her pride screamed in defiance, but the truth hit harder than anything else. She was no longer the queen. She had no one left. The black car came to a stop in front of Hope Haven, a shabby building nestled humbly among a row of gray, leafless trees. There were no glass walls or extravagant billboards like the places Emily was used to. Here, there was only a small sign attached to the old brick wall. The faded letters printed on a pale blue background read, Hope Haven, a rehabilitation center for victims of traffic accidents. Emily crossed her arms over her chest, scowling as she looked out the car window. She couldn't believe she had to spend the coming months in a place like this. Not a luxurious spa, not a posh hotel, but a place filled with broken people. The driver opened the door, but Emily remained seated, as if she could delay stepping into this nightmare. Get out, Greg, her lawyer, muttered, his tone stern. The sooner you start, the sooner it's over. Emily gritted her teeth and stepped out of the car, her designer shoes touching the cracked cement floor, and immediately she felt the sharp, jarring realization that she did not belong here. Inside, The air was thick with the smell of disinfectant mingling with the musty odor of old cotton, as if the building itself was trapped in a stifling atmosphere that never seemed to lift. From the hallway, she could hear soft groans, weak but haunting sounds emanating from the hospital rooms. A middle-aged man sat in a wheelchair at the corner of the hallway, his cloudy eyes staring at her blankly. Further down, a young nurse was helping a woman with a cast on her leg take small steps with a wooden crutch. Emily shivered, an invisible fear creeping into her bones. She wanted to run, but then a firm voice rang out ahead. "Are you Emily Ashford?" She turned around. A middle-aged woman with graying hair pulled back tightly was staring at her. She wore a simple hospital staff uniform, her face serious but marked with experience. "Who are you?" Emily asked, her voice guarded. "I'm Helen Carter, the manager here. And I don't care who you were before. Here, everyone works the same." Helen handed her a mop and pointed down the long hallway. "That hallway needs cleaning. I hope you're not expecting to be treated like a princess here." Emily's eyes widened in disbelief, her grip tightening around the mop. "Clean floors? I don't do these kinds of things." Helen folded her arms and stared at her, unblinking. "Do you want to go to jail instead?" Emily gritted her teeth, shame burning through her like a wildfire, consuming her pride. She turned away, heading down the hallway, her hands clutching the mop as though she wanted to crush it. "I don't belong here," she muttered to herself. Behind her, Helen simply shook her head, as though she were too familiar with people like Emily, people who believed the world would always revolve around them until they were thrown into a place where no one cared who they were. Emily fumbled with the mop, her eyes fixed on the cold, cracked tiles beneath her, trying to ignore everything around her. Her stomach churned with anger, her pride trampled with every swipe of the mop across the dirty water stains. She hated this place, hated the smell of disinfectant, hated the weak, haunting moans coming from the rooms nearby. But more than anything, she hated herself for being forced into this, forced to bow her head and do things she had never once imagined herself doing. "Slow down. You're cleaning too slowly." The hoarse voice from behind startled Emily. She spun around to see an elderly man sitting in a wheelchair, observing her with sharp, weathered eyes. His white hair was thin, his face wrinkled, but there was still a firmness to him, the kind that comes from living through many trials. On his left arm was a faded tattoo, an image perhaps from a past Emily couldn't even begin to guess. "Who are you?" she asked, trying to sound uninterested. "George. I've lived here for 40 years, he replied, pushing his wheelchair closer. "You're the rich little princess being thrown in here to learn a lesson, right?" Emily clenched her jaw, her hands tightening around the mop. She was used to disdainful looks, but there was something in George's tone that irritated her in a way she couldn't quite explain. "I don't need to learn any lessons," she muttered, turning away from him. George let out a soft chuckle, but it wasn't a kind laugh. It was the laugh of someone who had seen through her arrogance. "I used to think I was invincible too." His voice was low but clear. "Until I wasn't." Emily froze. She didn't want to ask, but she couldn't stop herself from speaking. "What do you mean?" George sighed, leaning his elbow on the armrest of his wheelchair, as if preparing to tell a story he had kept buried for too long. "When I was younger, I was reckless," he began, his gaze drifting to the far-off past. "I was an underground racer, racing for money, racing for the adrenaline, racing because I thought I could never lose, racing because I thought I was invincible." He paused, glancing at Emily, and for the first time, she couldn't look away from those eyes. "Then one night, it rained," he continued. "I didn't slow down. A turn, a split second of losing control, and—" George slammed his hand on the armrest of the chair, the sound heavy and final. "My car flipped 3 times. I woke up in the hospital, unable to feel my legs. The doctor said I'd never walk again." Emily swallowed hard. She wanted to say something, but the words were stuck in her throat. George leaned back in his chair, his eyes scanning Emily, as if he saw his younger self in her. "Do you know what that feels like?" he asked, his voice softer now. "The feeling of standing on top of the world, then suddenly being thrown straight into hell." Emily remained silent, but she understood. "The day I lost my legs," George's voice deepened, heavy like a funeral dirge. "That was the day I realized I was never truly invincible." The room fell quiet. The only sound was the ticking of a clock somewhere in the distance. Emily turned her face away, but she couldn't shake the feeling of unease creeping into every fiber of her being. For the first time, someone had shared a story, not to teach, not to judge, but simply to show her a truth she had always avoided. She didn't want to think about it, didn't want to think about that night, didn't want to think about what she had stolen from Liam. But George's trembling voice echoed in her mind like a resonating sound she couldn't erase. The soft groan echoed in the physical therapy room as Sarah struggled to lift her leg. Sweat trickled down her forehead, but her lips remained curved into a faint smile. Emily stood nearby, silently watching, a sense of pressure tightening around her chest as she observed Sarah's determination. Sarah was around 45 years old, her dark brown hair neatly tied back, her eyes gleaming with a terrifying resolve. Looking at her, no one would guess that once upon a time, she was a professional dancer, gliding across the stage like the wind. But now, those legs were motionless, trapped in a fate that a drunk driver had imposed upon her. The physical therapist knelt beside her, gently supporting her leg as Sarah attempted to lift it. She bit her lip, pain evident in every muscle, yet she didn't give up. Emily's throat felt dry. "Why are you smiling?" she blurted out, unable to hide her confusion. Sarah looked up, smiling, though her breath was still labored. "Because I'm still alive." That simple answer shook Emily to her core. She couldn't understand it. If she were in Sarah's position, she would have screamed, cursed the world, blamed fate for stealing her life. But Sarah, who had lost everything she loved, could still smile. "But," Emily stammered, "don't you feel angry? Don't you feel hate toward the one who did this to you?" Sarah lowered her leg, took a deep breath, and shook her head gently. "I used to. But then I realized that hatred doesn't help. It doesn't make me walk again. It doesn't make my life better. It just traps me in the past." Emily bit her lip, her hands clutching her sides tightly. Sarah looked at her, her eyes calm yet filled with a strength that Emily couldn't comprehend. "I just want to keep living. I'm not going to let a drunk driver decide my fate. If I fall, it's because I gave up, not because he took my legs." Emily held her breath. She didn't know what to say. How could she not break? How could someone who had lost everything still stand up, keep fighting, without hate, without resentment? For the first time, Emily felt small, not because she lacked money or power, but because she realized she had never possessed the kind of strength Sarah had. And the biggest question echoed in her mind, impossible to ignore: what would I do if I were in her shoes? Emily gripped the mop tightly, trying to focus on the task at hand, but her mind kept drifting amidst the whirlwind of her thoughts. The noises from the hallway echoed in her ears, the sound of wheelchair wheels scraping on the floor, the hurried footsteps of nurses, and the faint sighs of some patient. She had grown used to these sounds, but today, a sudden remark overheard from the office froze everything inside her. "The boy from the white Porsche accident is doing well. He's still in pain, but at least he's starting therapy." Emily's hand tightened around the mop handle until her knuckles turned white. A chill ran down her spine. White Porsche? It couldn't be. She turned her head, glancing towards the office where Helen was speaking to a nurse. Her voice remained calm, but every word hit Emily like a sentence. "The boy is strong. There was a time we feared he would never walk again, but the doctor says there's hope." Emily swallowed hard, a wave of dizziness sweeping over her. She slowly backed away towards a nearby wall, feeling as though the ground beneath her could crumble at any moment. Liam. He was here. Her chest tightened. Throughout these past days, she had heard stories from the other victims. George, Sarah, people who had lost their normal lives because of someone else's mistake. But she had never thought that her own victim would be here too. Her breath became shallow as she secretly moved toward the hallway where a door was slightly ajar. Through the small glass window, she saw a scrawny boy with bandaged legs sitting on a hospital bed. A physical therapist stood beside him, gently helping him through simple exercises. Liam didn't see her. He was biting his lip, beads of sweat dotting his forehead as he struggled to lift his leg, his face contorted with pain. She could see he was fighting a battle she had thrown him into. Emily's heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to turn away, but she couldn't. She had once thought that the accident was just a horrific event, something terrible she could leave behind if she endured long enough. But now, seeing Liam, witnessing the pain he was enduring because of her, she realized that it had never been something she could escape. She turned away from the window, facing the wall and walking quickly, as though she could run away from her own conscience. But no matter how far she walked, the image of that boy remained with her, like a mirror reflecting the mistake she could no longer deny. That night, Emily lay on the stiff bed in the staff break room, her eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. The room wasn't luxurious, just a single bed, a small wardrobe, and a flickering desk lamp that hummed quietly with her steady breath. But in her mind, there was no peace. The image of Liam's bandaged legs, his faint smile, his soft voice asking about her, those images kept looping in her mind like a never-ending film. She remembered the look in his eyes when he thanked her. There was no anger, no hatred, but there should have been. He should have hated her. He should have screamed when he saw her, cursed her for what she had done. But he didn't know. Emily turned over, burying her face in the pillow, feeling the air in the room grow stifling, making it hard to breathe. Then, silently, tears fell. For the first time, she didn't cry because of the loss of freedom, not because of the loss of her reputation, not because of the hatred from the world. She cried for Liam. She cried because that boy didn't deserve to endure what she had caused. She cried because for the first time, she truly understood someone else's pain. And for the first time, she asked herself an unanswerable question with no excuses, no way out. What have I done? The next day, Emily held the tray of water again, walking slowly down the hallway. But today, her hands no longer shook. She didn't know what had changed. Maybe it was the conversation from the night before. Maybe it was the weight pressing down on her heart. Maybe it was the feeling that she could no longer run away. She stepped into Liam's room, ready to face his gaze. But before she could say anything, the boy looked up and smiled at her. You don't have to avoid me. Emily froze. Liam tilted his head, his eyes bright, but full of sincerity. I don't hate you. She couldn't breathe. Tears rushed to her eyes before she could stop them. There were no sobs, no outbursts, just tears falling gently, softly, but unstoppable. She didn't deserve this forgiveness. She deserved hate, not mercy. But somehow, Liam could still smile at her. A sliver of light pierced through the darkness within her, and for the first time, Emily's heart felt lighter. The sky was painted a vibrant orange as Emily sat quietly on the bench outside Hope Haven. The setting sun cast long shadows across the worn pavement. She watched the patients around her, an elderly man practicing walking with a cane, a young woman struggling to move her paralyzed arm, and Liam, with his bandaged legs, sitting in a wheelchair, engrossed in a book resting on his lap. She had once thought of this place as a prison. Now, she wasn't so sure. Liam looked up and caught her gaze. He smiled, and for the first time, Emily didn't look away. She stood up, taking a deep breath. She had thought that 500 hours of community service was a sentence, the end of her glamorous life. But now, she realized it was just the beginning of something bigger. She still didn't know how to make amends. She still wasn't sure if she deserved forgiveness. But for the first time, she was ready to seek the answers. Emily turned away, walking down the long hallway of Hope Haven, where the soft yellow lights cast a glow on the aged walls. Her footsteps echoed in the silence, reflecting the restless thoughts in her mind. The road ahead wasn't over yet. And then, the door at the end of the hall opened, and a figure emerged, someone from her past, a truth she wasn't ready to face. Thank you for following Emily's emotional journey. If you found her story thought-provoking and want to know what happens next, don't forget to hit the like button and leave a comment below. Do you think Emily can truly change? Will she confront her past, or continue to run from it? Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next unexpected part of the story. Thank you for being part of Emotional Journey. See you in part 2.